The new 2026 season of Alone just dropped, and over the next 20 minutes, I'll break it down for you in detail. This latest 13th season of Alone may well be worth $500,000, because before Lake lies a near 1,000-pound moose. For this moose, Lake has waited a grueling 36 hours, and at this moment, one of his feet is already stepping into that $500,000 prize pool. The rush of victory barely registers before the next big problem hits him head-on. Staring down this half-ton giant with zero experience butchering moose, unsure how to tackle the huge carcass, Lake hesitates until 9:30 p.m. before finally starting. By then, the Arctic night has dropped to just 3 degrees Celsius. The chill buys him a little breathing room, but the moose's huge body is like a giant insulated container. The residual heat will let bacteria multiply rapidly. On that alone, Lake works through the dark to process this hard-won moose. He decides to first remove the hide and the internal organs, so the meat can cool faster, slowing bacterial growth. But faced with a 1,000-pound kill, Lake realizes that breaking down this moose is far harder than shooting it. The sheer scale of the butchering is only part of the challenge. The real threat is that the thick reek of blood could quickly lure in bears, wolves, and other big predators. Yet with this moose set to be his lifeline in the weeks ahead, forced to tough it out and keep going, Lake is dealing with an animal this massive for the first time. And each step, skinning, opening the cavity, pulling out the organs, takes more time and effort than expected. Seeing the thick fat on the liver and kidneys, he breaks into a grin. Going into winter, this fat matters more than lean meat. Those organs he hauls out are pure treasure. They'll keep Lake's nutrition covered for the days ahead, but also to add variety and flavor to his diet. When he finally pulls out a moose heart weighing 5 pounds, the entire set of internal organs has been removed. Just clearing out the moose's innards alone has cost Lake 3 hours, and he's still not finished processing the moose. To make hauling the moose back to camp easier, Lake chooses to cut it into big sections. Just one front leg weighs about 130 pounds, roughly 117 gin. Lifting it is hard enough on its own, let alone carrying a whole moose leg for several hundred meters through tangled brush.
Not sure if I can carry this. Crazy.
Although Lake isn't particularly skilled at processing moose, his years-long habit of staying up late actually helps him handle this long night of work. Even at this late hour, he's still sharp enough to keep grinding away at the skinning and butchering. Even in earlier seasons, Jordan and Roland never tried anything this crazy. Finishing a moose in a single night is impossible, and it puts Lake at risk of attracting predators, but it's a risk he's forced to accept. It's already past 5 a.m., so the rest of the butchering will have to wait for tomorrow. When he comes to again, it's already around 11 a.m. the next day. The whole moose he left out overnight has been weighing on his mind, so he skips eating and goes straight back to the carcass. Luckily, the worst case hasn't come to pass. There's barely any sign of predators at the scene, and the fat and organs, usually first to be eaten, are untouched. Lake can breathe a sigh of relief. The reason he values moose fat is that once winter sets in, fat becomes far more precious than lean meat. If predators eat all the fat and leave him piles of lean meat, he could still starve to death eating his fill, because a prolonged lack of fat leads to severe nutritional imbalance. Right now, the top priority is getting all this moose meat back to camp. Lake keeps tackling the rest of the butchering. Even though it's his first time handling a moose after fumbling through it last night, his motions today are obviously more sure and efficient. He carves off the hindquarters, ribs, and tenderloins.
Okay, ribs. Basically, I'm not a hunter, so it feels very good to have this moose. Also, in this competition, there are many people who are very good hunters. Another person might catch something big and could go for super long.
With the last rack of ribs cut free, the breakdown of this one, almost 5-pound moose, is finally complete, and Lake collapses to the ground in exhaustion.
Oh, I'm done. Gosh, I'm tired.
He barely pauses to breathe before diving straight into the next task. Lake's camp is about 183 meters from the kill site. It's not a long walk, but each run he's hauling dozens of kilos, sometimes even bigger slabs of meat. To reduce how many times he has to go, he loads up to the edge of what he can carry each trip. One rear leg from the moose is nearly as heavy as he is, and after trekking back and forth several times, Lake is winded. He hangs the meat on tree branches, letting it air dry, which dissipates heat and reduces ground moisture and animal interference. The meat rack is a little over 20 meters from camp, so if a bear, wolverine, or wolf approaches, Lake can spot it and drive it off immediately. Seeing the mountain of meat in front of him, Lake shows a smile. This moose solves his food crisis. It gives him leverage to chase that $500,000 prize. After working non-stop for 3 hours, Lake finally sits down. Yet with this pile of moose before him, he trims a chunk, slips it onto a branch, and lets it roast. For Lake at this moment, food is no longer the scarce resource. What's truly scarce is the little physical strength he has left. He thought he could finally replenish his energy properly.
More. For now, I'm planning to win.
But just as the stewed venison touched his lips, a noise sounded not far away. A few gray ducks had already targeted the moose fat, and while Lake was distracted, they kept pecking at the choicest bits. He sprang up at once and chased them off.
Just resource.
They were small birds, yet they sounded an alarm for him. Whether they were pecking meat or dropping feces, it all meant direct losses for Lake. If even birds could find this carcass, then wolves, wolverines, and even black bears with far keener noses would sooner or later follow the scent right to him. To avoid trouble brewing overnight, Lake decided to build a meat storage box immediately. This decision was anything but redundant. In past seasons of Alone, most big game winners made the same call. Jordan in Season 6, Roland in Season 7, Clay in Season 8, and Tim in Season 11 all built dedicated meat storage setups. This has practically become the standard procedure for handling big game on Alone. Great minds think alike. Just like veterans from past seasons, Lake made the same call at a critical moment. He layered logs and spruce branches over the meat to deter small scavengers and make it tougher for big predators to rip into it. From carving, hauling, and curing to building the meat cache, each task drained energy. 2 days of punishing, high-intensity work. Lake's body finally hit its limit. Even after eating, he still felt hungry. Back at camp, he collapsed onto his bed.
I can feel my body is really exhausted. Gosh, I'm tired. Just give me 5 minutes.
And knowing there were still hundreds of kilos of venison left to smoke, plus a permanent shelter that was far from finished, this seemingly endless workload was steadily draining his strength and willpower. Only by surviving ordeals most couldn't handle does Lake earn his place at the finish. After dealing with the beaver, Elk made a completely different choice. He didn't chase after a solid, comfortable shelter. Instead, he used the simplest setup that met his need for housing. For him, food matters more than making shelter comfortable. Elk pulls out an entire beaver tail. The tail is the most prized part of the beaver because it's packed with fat and has long been a favorite delicacy for hunters. Since catching the beaver on day 16, he's been busy through day 19. Elk cuts the beaver meat into small pieces. He's going to cook a rich, fatty beaver stew for dinner to give himself a real payoff for the grind of the last few days. This beaver has lifted a huge weight off his mind. Once the beaver stew starts bubbling, Elk dives back into upgrading his shelter. With Arctic winter closing in, staying warm under one flimsy tarp would make surviving the cold impossible. Elk plans to add a heating fire pit to his shelter, so that even in harsh winter weather, he can light a fire and cook dinner inside. Since the fire pit will be close to one side of the shelter, Elk uses branches to build a heat shield wall inside to keep the fire pit from getting so hot that it burns through the tarp. He also digs a trench in the ground. This trench acts as an air channel for the fire pit, sending oxygen to the fire's base, so the fire burns hotter with less smoke. Then he drags over 2 metal cans, containers he picked up while exploring on day 6. He's going to use the 2 cans to form a kind of wall.
让火坑的热量反射回自己身上。忽然，一阵肉香飘来。
And Elk remembers it's dinner time. He constantly reminds himself to eat more, so that when the show's medical team comes around, he doesn't get pulled from the game for skimping on food and dropping weight too fast. That'd be a brutal loss. To make his diet more balanced, Elk also adds some edible plants to the stew.
I swear, food just tastes better.
So the stew comes out sweeter and fuller. He keeps shoveling it in. Each mouthful is capital to keep him in the fight. After dark, Nilu lit a fire in his shelter to see if this simple heat-reflecting wall would really work.
Fire in my house.
He realized that a fire burning in his shelter could truly lift his mood. Nilu lay in a sleeping bag, watching the campfire, feeling warmth inside. Yet overnight, the Arctic wilds turned to ice, with the shelter too cramped inside. He put up a small cooking shelter just outside camp, ready for whenever he had to eat outdoors. He pulled out a slab of smoked sea otter ribs for lunch. The bones didn't carry much meat, but for Nilu, it was still a very decent meal. The smoked sea otter ribs tasted a lot like beef. Anyone who often eats sea otter knows its meat is rich, tender, and slightly sweet. Overall, much tastier than beef. But Nilu didn't choose to finish it all in one go. He saved half for tomorrow. What he had left barely lasted until day 30, but the days after that would be rough. Nero suddenly realized he hadn't gotten any new food for a long time, and the pressure in his heart surged again. If he wanted to win this challenge, Nero decided he could no longer just lie flat. It was time to put the main quest back onto hunting. He headed to check the snares and traps he'd set. The night snowfall lay over the forest like a blank page, recording every animal's movements in perfect detail. but his own snares and traps turned up empty. So Nero headed to the riverbank to check his beaver traps. Seeing the ice forming on the river, Nero felt his heart sink. Before winter truly sets in, beavers usually retreat to their lodges, hunkering under the ice and barely moving. When the lake ice is over solid, it will become much harder for Nero to catch beavers using land traps, and the time left to him may be only a day or two. To seize this last chance, Nilo decides to change his strategy. Instead of spreading himself thin, he'll stake everything on the sea otters. He tracks the sea otters' usual routes and gets ready to lay more traps along them. This is his final push, and right now the ice is steadily spreading. If he can't catch a sea otter before the lake surface freezes solid, the coming winter will be even harsher. As the temperature keeps dropping, Nilo also starts further improving his shelter. He hauls a discarded plank up from the shore and fashions it into a rough door for the shelter. It may not look refined, but it can effectively block the cold wind outside and keep frigid air from pouring straight in. Each day before going out to check his traps, Nilo stokes a fire, warming his body so that when he returns from work to the shelter, he can immediately dry his damp clothes and warm up quickly. Outside, the wind cuts like a knife, bitterly cold. But he doesn't just cling to the warm fire. Nilo still heads out each day to check his traps. Survival only belongs to those who refuse to stop fighting for it. Nilo craves fish, but when he checks his automatic lines, each hook comes up with untouched bait.
Nothing at all. Come on, fish. Where you at? We're starting to feel the pinch.
As the air keeps getting colder, the fish slip down into deeper water, making fishing even harder. Line after line comes up empty, and the strain on Nilo keeps rising. Fishing was the one food source he'd counted on most. Yet from day one up to now, he hasn't landed a single fish, and the gillnet in the creek has stayed empty. Before the surface ices over and traps the net, Nilo must haul the gear out. But when he tries to pull up the last line, the new ice has locked the hook in solid. Even breaking the line doesn't free it.
Come on. Get off. Ugh. It's broken. You little creek. I don't care. Done with you, man.
No wonder he's furious. Since the start, Nilo has never managed to take a fish from this river. Despite his own rotten luck, Nilo's always figured the others were hauling in fish from this river. He doesn't know that top angler Porty hit his limit and went home. Though the river god still hasn't granted Nilo a single fish, he refuses to give up on the search for food. The wind and snow grow more bitter. Nilo returns to camp and adds clothing against the cold. He heads out into the storm to check his beaver traps again, repeatedly going out, refusing to give up. Luck finally swings to Nilo's side. In the trap, a beaver is
We have a beaver stuck in the
waiting
snare.
for him.
Still alive though. Holy heart is pumping like a mofo.
Nilo grips an axe and approaches. Every kill brings reluctance. The truest way to honor your prey is to make its death as swift as you can. When it's finally over, the emotions he's been bottling up for so long at last burst free.
Yes! Oh! Life! Food! Thank you.
He's never mastered these waters, yet the beavers keep siding with him. Maybe out in the wild, luck never arrives in the way you expect. Landing 2 beavers in a row means more meat and more fat. From this moment, Nilo knows he's stepped back from the brink of failure. He hoists the beaver onto his shoulder and carries it to camp, still half in disbelief that this gift came at the most critical moment. Looking back on how each fishing plan collapsed and the hunger kept closing in, he finally feels a long-lost sense of relief now that beaver meat is back on the menu. Back at camp, Nilo sets to work on the hard-won beaver before ice and snow fully seal the land. This beaver has successfully bought him at least 10 more days of life. With winter tightening its grip, Andrew starts rushing work on his permanent shelter. The tiny cabin in the wild is slowly coming together as he builds an entrance passage before the sloped shelter. Andrew begins putting the last line of defense on his shelter, laying a layer of spruce branches over the roof, channeling how branches lie, so rain runs off the roof instead of soaking into the shelter. This kind of detail may look simple, but it determines whether the shelter can withstand the coming winter. Because for Andrew, this isn't just a stopgap shelter anymore. It's the home he'll be living in for a long time. Yet as the days grow shorter, Andrew also realizes he doesn't have much time left. Soon, the first heavy snowfall could hit. He has to get this shelter to a state he can really depend on. Luckily, his earlier food stores have taken a bit of the weight off. A single rabbit can't solve his long-term problems, but it does give him a few days to catch his breath. Compared with food, what Andrew cares more about now is shelter. From the first design, he wanted to build a place to light a fire for warmth and have a sleeping area, so he'd still have space to move around. He blends an open front lean-to with an Indian-style tent, creating a more complete living space. There's a place to sleep and an area to fire and cook. For Andrew, this is his first real home in the wild. When the first flames rise inside the shelter, Andrew finally breaks into a smile. It's not just a fire, it's the ignition ritual for his permanent shelter. The smoke curling up still reminds him. There are parts of this shelter that need improvement, but for now, Andrew is quite satisfied with it. He'll let the rest of the work evolve bit by bit in the coming days. Each day, Andrew tweaks how he survives. The snares and traps have helped a little, but so far, in the first 20 days, Andrew has only caught 2 rabbits. As the only truly starving contestant this season, he finally feels a flicker of hope and no longer thinks he must rig up more snares or traps. He recalls a line from Hemingway: "Competition isn't with others, but with the past self you strive to surpass." Andrew believes that to win this challenge, he must keep pushing past his own limits, instead of always thinking about beating the other contestants. Yet for Andrew, landing a single fish would be progress, with just 2 rabbits in 20 days. It's hard to imagine a contestant worse off than Andrew. Even Booth, the first to tap out, managed to get a sea otter. So far, Andrew has already lost 28 pounds, and if he wants to stay out here, he has to find a more reliable source of food. Fishing has always been a key goal in Andrew's plan. High-fat fish like pike, whitefish, and burbot are the real key to lasting out here long-term. Andrew returns to the water's edge to look for an opening, and while exploring a small creek, he realizes there are a lot of tiny fish tucked away here. They're small, but this discovery lets him see hope again. He uses the small fish as bait, casts out 2 automatic fishing lines in succession, hoping for a good haul. The wait is long, but Andrew doesn't leave. Alone in the wild, he finally has time to look back on his life. Cut off from phones, the internet, and outside noise, this deep quiet actually helps him stay more positive. And as he waits, the water's surface at last starts to stir. Andrew eases in the line, and from the pole, he knows a fish is on.
Oh, wow. Aha! I've got a burbot.
It's exactly the catch he's been hoping for, easing his worries about food for the time being. This river cod will make a rich dinner. Andrew is still living day to day, unsure where his next meal will come from. Will is living in comfort, at ease, thanks to the shelter he built earlier. Now provides excellent warmth in the winter, so that every night Will can sleep soundly. Of all contestants, Will is living best. His full set of traps has paid off. Look at the rabbit pelts in his shelter. King of Thorns catches a big fish, and Will is living in the wild like on holiday. Heavy snow covers the wilderness, and Will senses the world has changed. For someone living alone out here, snow means cold and new challenges. But in that moment, Will's thoughts turn to his distant family. He pictures his children, picturing their joy at the falling snow, and remembering the moments they shared together. That familiar feeling makes this strange wilderness feel a bit like home. After that brief wave of emotion, Will quickly returns to reality. Out here, every day demands work. Finding food, checking traps, handling the everyday challenges of staying alive. In this stretch, rabbits have been his main source of food. To honor the animals that have helped him survive, he decides to give his camp a name, Ukalayachak Camp, which in Inupiaq means rabbit camp. The name comes from a song he sings to his children every day. Far from his family, Will uses this way to bring his home and culture into this empty, uninhabited land. 3 weeks out here have already blurred his sense of the exact date. No phones, no news, no noise. Each morning when he wakes, his mornings are about one thought: staying alive. Will understands the experience isn't meant only for the man he is now. His children, and later generations, might watch these recordings. And when the name Ukalayachak Camp is carved in, Will also completes his very first mark on this land. The long-awaited sunshine finally drives away the days of gloom. For Pedrosa, this is not just good weather. It feels more like a fresh start. Pedrosa decides to finish the roofing of his shelter because only after the housing problem is solved can he throw all his energy into fishing. In his view, the real deciding factor has never been rabbits, but fish. Fish are rich in fat, which in winter converts into nutrients the body needs. For now, Pedrosa can count on rabbit meat to keep fed for 3 days, but he is still full of drive. He believes that as long as he can still swing an axe, hope has not disappeared. Log after log, he pours almost all his strength into this shelter. But the wilderness doesn't cut its price just because you give it your all. When he finally drops the last log, his body gives out before the shelter does. The work isn't done, and he's already nearly drained.
And I am too tired to finish it. Why did I do?
He tosses all his remaining ingredients into the pot, This soup isn't about taste so much as giving himself a reason to carry on. Though snow is already falling outside, he still can't stop working today because winter won't slow down, and the shelter must be done before it sets in. He keeps hauling thick logs back to camp. With every new wall, he's well aware how draining this is, yet he still chooses to push on. Yet he kept pushing himself until his body finally sounded the alarm. He was forced to pause and gulp for air. But after a short break, he hefted the logs again. Pedrosa carries hundreds of pounds in one trip back to camp, set on completing the last details of his shelter. It also happens to be the day of the show's medical check. Pedrosa finishes every bite of his lunch, hoping it won't lead to him being pulled from the competition for health reasons. But before he finishes eating, a speedboat pulls up outside his shelter. Pedrosa figures it must be the production team's boat, though it's arrived sooner than he expected. Once the exams are done, the others are basically okay. Just a bit of low blood sugar or no bowel movement for weeks. The doctors simply tell them to eat more. Though Pedrosa had just pushed himself through grueling work today, his blood pressure, heart rate, every metric is recorded. Pedrosa thinks he's doing fine until the doctor gathers everyone aside and the atmosphere abruptly changes.
And I understand his resting heart blood pressure's down 20 points.
And it was pretty alarming.
And your heart rate's decreased to a point where it's now critically low. And for that reason, we feel it's necessary to medically extract you. Your brain's not well perfused. You're getting yourself into danger.
Today, now, but I feel awesome. I carry all these logs today. I'm feeling energetic to build all my shelter.
Ultimately, the doctor said Pedrosa had to drop out right away. His blood pressure dropped to a critically low level, and he has no choice but to go to the hospital for tests. It wasn't a wound or sickness. His body was driven to the edge. The cruelest part is that he can hardly feel anything amiss. He insists he's still strong, pointing out he just hauled dozens of logs today. But against hard medical numbers, sheer will can't take the body's place. After a brief silence, he accepts the verdict, because he knows that if he keeps pushing on, the price he may pay is his life. The man who once thought everything was going his way at the start is now forced to quit because of his body. From the day he entered the wilderness, he just kept going, never once slowing. Yet now his body crossed the finish line before his will could.